The naive subjects in Milgram's experiment were never informed of the potential emotional ramifications that they could be exposed to during the duration of the experiment. I quote Diana Burmad when I say, "If deceit is used to obtain consent, by definition it cannot be informed. Deceptive instruction logically contradicts the informed consent provision contained in all federal and professional ethical guidelines." Milgram clearly violated the federal and professional ethical guidelines because he did not give the participants a fair warning of what possible consequences the experiment could cause them. 3 subjects even had seizures. Although seizures are physical, the seizures can be attributed to the overwhelming stress the subjects had and due in large part by the emotional discomfort caused by the experiment.
Oh, excuse me. I didn't see you there. So you've come to me with the question of whether or not Milgram's use of deception in his experiment was ethical. To which I reply to you, it surely is. To quote the famous psychologist, "Foreknowledge of results can never be the invariable accompaniment of an experimental probe." And what this means is that if we are testing something, it is because we do not know the results that will occur afterwards, meaning that the symptoms exhibited by naive subjects were not projected or forecasted prior to the experiment, meaning that if Milgram were to give, for instance, knowledge of these symptoms prior to the naive subjects participating in his experiment, he would not have been able to know what these symptoms might have been.
The prods used by the experimenter became relatively excessive to the point where it caused for greater emotional and psychological stress. Even when people were shown to be physically disturbed, as seen by their stuttering, biting of their lips, and groaning, there were subjects who were literally trembling, they were sweating, some even digging their fingernails into their palms. Is that not evident that the participants were in a state of emotional stress? That they've had enough? Yet the experimenters kept nagging the subjects to please continue, that ultimately they had no choice but to continue. Where is ethics in this? Subjects were physically shaken, yet kept being bombarded with demands to continue shocking. Prods are acceptable in an experimental setting, but the extent to which Milgram's experiment went to was excessive to the point where it was unethical.
My friends, when Adolf Hitler was terrorizing Europe during World War II,
his primary weapon was destructive obedience. His followers willingly administered horrific acts all over the world through destructive obedience. This is why Milgram's experiment cannot be hindered by momentary symptoms that do not permanently affect the subjects. Some may claim that symptoms such as nervous sweating, nervous laughter, grinding of teeth may be of a magnitude that is too significant for us to learn more about destructive obedience. I say to that, hogwash. Absolutely not.
Milgram's explanation in regards to the ethical aspect of his experiment was preposterous. He says that the discomfort caused to the victim is momentary, while the gains resulting from the experiment are enduring. That one statement does not give Milgram credibility that his experiment was ethical. In fact, it even makes the experiment seem even more unethical. Milgram is basically stating that an experiment does not have to be completely ethical. It can even be uncomfortable and cause some negative emotional ramifications for its subjects, as long as the field of psychology gains its necessary data points. Due to ethics, the experimenter told the subject that they were allowed to leave whenever they wished, and that stood true, but they also aren't allowed to cause harm to the subject. When Milgram says discomfort is momentary, it contradicts the ethics of not harming your subjects. He caused moral or ethical discomfort, no matter how temporary, all to test the inferred authority of a white coat.
My friends, at this point in the debate, it becomes imperative that we examine the responses from the naive subjects themselves. We can no longer analyze these lofty retrospective analyses that Bromride offers us in her argument against Milgram's ethics. Following the experiment, Milgram gathered the naive and informed subjects together for a meet and greet where they got to share with one another their experiences. Thus, the naive subjects were informed that the shocks they thought they were administering were actually fake. Thus, the psychological symptoms were not allowed to permanently affect the naive subjects. In a survey response to the experiment, 84% of the subjects said they were glad or very glad they took part in it. 15% gave a neutral response. This means that 99% did not indicate any lasting negative effects from their experience in the experiment. Thus, we are left with the question: is the progress in the study of destructive obedience obtained through Milgram's experiment worth the momentary distress the subjects experienced? It is my belief that 99% of the subjects themselves would say that it is worth the progress that was obtained. And therefore, I ask you and our honorable judge, Master Kim, to find Milgram not guilty and prove that his experiment was ethical.